The dominant threat vector is no longer kinetic. The public is conditioned to watch the skies for missile launches, a legacy threat from a bipolar world. This is a strategic misdirection. The kinetic cost is now too high, the attribution too clear. The real protocol is asymmetric, targeting the system's dependencies, not its armor. The target is not cities, it is coherence. The weapon is not fire, it is silence. The central nervous system of the global order runs through a handful of undersea choke points. Trillions in financial transactions, military command and control, primary intelligence, all transmitted through fiber optic cables on the ocean floor. This is the system's critical vulnerability. For a state facing a terminal solvency crisis, as documented in Iran, where a collapsing rial and internal protests push the military to high alert, a direct confrontation is national suicide. But economic pressure is a mathematical accelerant. It forces a launch-on-warning posture for asymmetric assets. The blueprint for this exists. Ukraine's drone war demonstrates the doctrine, the systematization of low-cost, improvised combat assets against a superior force. The objective is not destruction, but paralysis. Severing these data arteries, or blinding satellites in low Earth orbit, achieves strategic dislocation at a fraction of the kinetic cost. It creates the blind Leviathan, a global power with unmatched military hardware, suddenly deaf, dumb, and isolated. A carrier group without satellite data is merely a liability. A financial system without price feeds is a dead switch. This is the new calculus of escalation. The kinetic action in Ukraine is not an act of strength. It is a solvency crisis, externalized. CSIS analysis confirms the conflict itself is a catastrophic domestic liability, an unpopular resource-draining venture that depletes political capital on an hourly basis. A state cannot sustain such a liability without an offsetting asset. When a regime's internal legitimacy collapses, it is forced to manufacture a new balance sheet. The immense, ongoing cost of the war creates a mathematical imperative. The only way to justify the expenditure is to frame the conflict as an existential, zero-sum struggle. This forces a pivot away from conventional warfare, which it cannot afford, toward its only remaining leverage. That leverage is asymmetry. It is the credible threat of disproportionate, system-shattering violence. This blueprint is now a global protocol for collapsing states. Analysts note that as Iran's economy deteriorates, its military goes on high alert. When cornered, the playbook is not de-escalation. It is a launch-on-warning posture for systemic disruption. Economic pressure, once a tool of containment, now functions as a mathematical accelerant. Each new sanction, each frozen asset, does not decrease the regime's capacity for war. It increases its incentive for escalation. It forces the leadership to liquidate its final asset, the willingness to break the entire system to ensure its own survival. The war is a transaction to avoid political bankruptcy. The kinetic cost basis for systemic disruption has collapsed. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, quantifies this asymmetry. A $5 million main battle tank can now be neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This is not a balanced equation. It is a solvency crisis for legacy military doctrines. This phenomenon is clinically termed the democratization of violence, the terminal decline of the state monopoly on high-impact lethality. A state like Iran, facing a currency in ruin and internal protests, cannot compete in a capital-intensive arms race. Economic pressure, intended as a containment protocol, now functions as a mathematical accelerant. It forces a pivot. As analysis of Ukraine's drone war confirms, a blueprint now exists for converting garage-level improvisation into systematized, asymmetric combat. A collapsing state is compelled to leverage its only viable asset, the ability to deliver disproportionate, system-shattering kinetic events at a near-zero marginal cost. The dominant geopolitical model is obsolete. Analysts observing regional instability in nodes like South Africa or Canada are watching symptoms, not the cause. These are not sovereign crises in isolation. They are proxy laboratories. They function as gray zones for staging, calibration, and cost analysis of asymmetric attack vectors before deployment against primary economic targets. The core driver is no longer the strength of rising powers, but the mathematical certainty of state failure. A nation facing a terminal solvency crisis has nothing left to leverage but systemic disruption itself. The blueprint is being perfected in plain sight. According to Eurasia Review, Ukraine's drone warfare has evolved from crude improvisation to systematized combat. This is a live-fire laboratory for low kinetic cost, high-impact protocols. Simultaneously, a state like Iran, facing what modern Ghana calls a Ryle in ruin and massive internal protests, is forced into an asymmetric posture. Its military on high alert, as reported by Al Jazeera, is not a precursor to conventional war. It is a signal of a launch-on-warning doctrine triggered by economic, not military thresholds. The gray zone serves one function: to finalize a replicable, scalable protocol for economic warfare. The objective in the proxy theater is not to win territory, but to beta test a weapon. The systematized drone tactics from Ukraine, the anti-Taiwan information campaigns noted by Japanese scholars. These are not disparate events. They are modules of an open-source insurgency doctrine being downloaded by every state actor facing a solvency crisis. The operational logic is irrefutable. Why absorb the high kinetic cost of a conventional conflict when a pre-tested asymmetric vector can trigger a liquidity crisis in your adversary's homeland for a fraction of the price? Therefore, the next phase of systemic risk will not originate from a naval blockade or a declared war. CSIS and RUSI analysis points to the true threat: the protocols, not the proxies. A collapsing state, accelerated by economic sanctions, is mathematically incentivized to deploy its only remaining asset: the credible threat of disproportionate, system-shattering violence, perfected in a disposable gray zone. The laboratory is irrelevant. The weaponized blueprint is now in global circulation. This is not a failure of containment. It is the predictable result of treating a solvency crisis as a behavioral problem. The final failsafe is not a human decision. It is a pre-authorized protocol. It is called launch on warning. The logic is absolute. If enemy missiles are detected inbound, you launch your own before they are destroyed in their silos. It is a mathematical counter to a decapitation strike. There is no committee vote. There is no debate. It is an automated response to a specific data signature. This protocol contains a systemic flaw. It assumes the data is pure. Now, we enter the fog of digital war. A sophisticated cyber attack does not need to destroy a command center. It only needs to blind its radar or spoof its satellite feed. The systematized drone and electronic warfare seen in Ukraine is the blueprint. A state already on high alert from internal protest and external threats, such as Iran, operates on a razor's edge. If the early warning network goes black, the commander is confronted with a binary choice, a choice dictated by the protocol itself. Is this a system malfunction, or is it the prelude to a decapitation strike that is already underway? As analysts at RUSI have confirmed, the protocol forces the commander to assume the worst-case scenario. The absence of data becomes the trigger. Fear is not the variable, it's the operational constant. The system is designed to launch. A state facing a terminal solvency crisis does not negotiate. It escalates. Reports from modern Ghana confirm the Iranian rial is in ruin, triggering escalating internal protests. This is not a political problem. It is a mathematical certainty, leading to a change in strategic posture. Simultaneously, Al Jazeera confirms the Iranian military is on high alert. This is not a defensive measure against U.S. attack threats. Under extreme economic pressure, the state's internal fragility is converted into its primary asset, a credible threat of asymmetric escalation. The traditional deterrence model is inverted. The vector for this escalation will not be a conventional missile. The blueprint is public domain, detailed in analyses of Ukraine's shift from improvised to systematized drone combat. A collapsing state can now leverage cheap, commercially sourced hardware to inflict disproportionate economic cost with near-zero attribution. The calibration forecast for the next 12 months is therefore not a military strike, but an attribution-impossible economic event. Expect a coordinated drone swarm to execute a targeted data blackout against a critical global shipping hub, such as the port automation and logistics network at Jebel Ali. The objective is not destruction, but to demonstrate a systemic vulnerability. It is a launch-on warning signal in a new era of economic warfare,